Hey there, brave soul. Tonight, we're going back in time, way back, to a time when being a kid wasn't all hopscotch and bedtime stories, but horror. Oh yes, welcome to the Middle Ages, where childhood was less about innocence and more about survival. Forget birthday parties and iPads. Imagine a world where your favourite toy is a stick, your best friend is a pig, and your worst nightmare is sleeping on bedbugs, cockroaches, and everything else you could ever imagine. Before you even think about rolling your eyes, buckle up. Because tonight, we're stepping into the tiny, flea-ridden shoes of a medieval child. And let's be honest, you wouldn't last a single day. You wonder why? Do you know that living up to 5 years in the Middle Ages isn't a milestone but a miracle? It's expected that something should have killed you. Disease, hunger, accidents, and sometimes your siblings. Surprised? You'll find out shortly. So go ahead, grab your favourite stuffed animal, hide under the covers, and prepare for a bedtime story that's guaranteed to ruin your night. Because being a child in the Middle Ages wasn't just tough, it was downright medieval. Welcome to the Middle Ages, kiddo. It's your big day, your grand entrance into a world that's equal parts dirt, disease and despair. And guess what? You didn't even get to pick the time or place. No sterile delivery room, no trained doctors, no congratulatory cigars. Just a wooden hut, a dirt floor, and a midwife with hands rougher than an old goat's backside. Your mother's been labouring for hours, maybe days. And let's be real, medieval childbirth is less of a medical event and more of a medieval lottery. Will you survive the night? Will she? Flip a coin, say a prayer, and try not to think too hard about it. The air in the room is thick, thick with sweat, thick with the smell of fear, and thick with that special brand of medieval hygiene that would make a modern paramedic weep. The midwife, if you're lucky enough to have one, has seen this all before. She's armed with a tattered linen rag, a knife that looks suspiciously like it's also used for gutting fish, and an attitude that screams, "I don't have time for your nonsense." As you slide into the world, probably head first, probably screaming, you're immediately greeted by the medieval equivalent of a welcome mat. Straw that's been reused so many times it's practically compost, a rickety wooden stool, and an entire family gathered around, staring like they've never seen a baby before. Because in the Middle Ages, childbirth isn't a private affair. Oh no. It's the village's business. Because nothing says miracle of life like a random uncle poking his head in to see if you've got all your fingers. If you're a boy, congratulations. The room collectively breathes a sigh of relief. You're the future of the family line, the one who'll, hopefully, live long enough to hold a hoe or a sword. If you're a girl, well, let's just say the enthusiasm's a little more muted. Not that anyone's cruel about it. Okay, they kind of are. But the medieval mindset is all about survival. A girl means a dowry to pay someday, and that's a problem no one really wants to think about right now. You're immediately wrapped, if you can call it that, in a scrap of cloth that smells like last week's dinner. Swaddling's a thing, but here it's less about comfort and more about keeping your fragile little limbs from flailing into the dirt. There's no cute baby hat. There's no Instagram post. There's just the hope that you'll make it to tomorrow. And let's talk about that first breath. It's a miracle you're even breathing, given the air quality in this hut. A mixture of smoke from the hearth fire, the tang of animal sweat, and the not-so-distant aroma of the family chamber pot. It's like your lungs are getting a medieval baptism in survival. Your mother, assuming she survived the ordeal, because let's be honest, medieval childbirth is a grim roll of the dice, is exhausted, pale, and possibly already infected. There's no antiseptic, no painkillers, no trained obstetrician waiting to swoop in with a sterile scalpel. Just grit, determination, and maybe a priest hovering nearby, ready to deliver last rites if things go south. The midwife, bless her questionable hygiene, cuts the cord with a knife that's probably been used for everything from trimming beards to gutting fish. She ties it off with a piece of rough thread, muttering something about saints and the mercy of God. Then she might sprinkle you with holy water, or maybe just hope the rats don't come too close tonight. If you're lucky, you'll be baptized within the day, because in medieval theology, an unbaptized baby might as well be a lost soul. That means a quick dash to the local priest, assuming he's sober enough to stand, and a hasty ritual that's less about celebration and more about ensuring you don't end up in limbo if you croak before sunrise. And let's be clear, croaking before sunrise is a very real possibility. Infant mortality in the Middle Ages is the stuff of nightmares. 1 in 3 babies won't live to see their first birthday. A sniffle? It could be the plague. A cough? It could be consumption. A random fever. Good luck, kid. Welcome to the world where your first toy might be the Grim Reaper's scythe. But hey, let's not get too dark too fast. After all, you've made it this far, out of the womb, into the dirt, and now you're officially part of the medieval human race. The room around you is buzzing with muted excitement and dread. Your father, if he's around, might pat your mother's shoulder awkwardly before heading out to tend the fields. Or the pigs. Or the neighbour's pigs. Because the world doesn't stop just because you were born. Life in the Middle Ages is a relentless machine. There's no maternity leave, no time to rest. The family's survival depends on every able body, including yours, eventually. But for now, you're a screaming, wriggling bundle of potential. And if you're going to survive this world, you'd better learn fast. And speaking of fast, let's move on to your first bed. Spoiler alert, it's not a crib from Pottery Barn. Next up, your first bed. Straw, fleas, and maybe a rat. Congratulations, you survived your first day in the Middle Ages. That's no small feat. Now, after the chaos of childbirth and the midwife's questionable hygiene, it's time to settle into your new home sweet home. Don't get too comfortable though. Your crib is more medieval horror than nursery rhyme. Your first bed is a triumph of medieval ingenuity. A wooden frame, if your family's lucky, but more likely just a pile of straw on the dirt floor. Forget plush mattresses and soft blankets. You're diving headfirst into a nest of ancient, half-rotted straw that's been passed down like a family heirloom. It's the same bed your older siblings, or even your parents, slept in before they graduated to their own scratchy corner. And by graduated, I mean they moved 2 feet to the left. The straw itself is a medley of surprises. Mouldy, damp, and seasoned with the kind of earthy tang that only comes from living in a house that doubles as a barn. Every shift of your tiny body sends up a cloud of dust, straw bits, and yes, the occasional scuttling insect. Fleas are the permanent residents here. Consider them your first roommates. They don't pay rent, but they'll be feasting on your blood nightly. And let's not forget the rats, because where there's straw, there's dinner, at least for them. Rats are the medieval version of bedbugs, except bigger, bolder, and with the potential to carry the plague. They scamper around like they own the place, and to be fair, they sort of do. If you're lucky, you'll just hear them in the rafters. If you're not, well, let's just say you're in for a real, up-close and personal medieval wildlife experience. Your blanket, if you have one, is a woolen marvel that's seen better centuries. It smells like it's been through a flood, a barn fire, and at least 3 pandemics. Washing? That's a luxury for nobles and monks. For you, it's the same scratchy blanket that's been passed down since the last famine, heavy with grime, sweat, and memories of questionable hygiene. Congratulations, you're now wearing the family history. The bed itself is communal, of course. Privacy is a concept that hasn't quite made its way to your medieval hut. If you think you're getting a cozy solo nap, think again. You'll be sharing this flea circus with your siblings, your parents, and maybe even a cousin or two who showed up last winter and never left. Sleeping arrangements are less good night and more please don't roll over on the baby. And don't expect lullabies or bedtime stories to ease you into sleep. The medieval soundtrack is a symphony of hacking coughs, creaking beams, and the occasional goat braying from the corner. You drift off to the sweet serenade of your neighbour's donkey and the gentle scratching of lice exploring new territory on your scalp. Forget pyjamas. Clothes are a luxury, and you're already wearing all you own. That means your tunic, if you have one, is doubling as your blanket, your pillow, and your mosquito net. If you're unlucky, it's crusted with the day's dirt and last week's dinner, because laundry is a concept that hasn't really caught on yet. If you're lucky, well, let's be real, no one's lucky here. And speaking of luck, let's talk about hygiene. You're probably wearing the same cloth diaper, or maybe nothing at all, since no one's invented disposable anything. Any accidents? Let's just say you're marinating in them until someone bothers to clean you up, which might happen next week if the stars align. If you're really unlucky, a stray chicken might mistake your bed for a latrine. Welcome to the night shift in medieval Europe. But hey, at least you're not alone. You're surrounded by family members who are equally sleep-deprived, equally itchy, and equally resigned to this scratchy, smelly existence. Bonding, medieval style, happens over shared straw mattresses, communal lice, and the occasional near-death experience from a rolling parent. And that's just your first night. Tomorrow you'll wake up to the same straw, the same fleas, and the same rats, plus a fresh helping of medieval chores. Because in this world, being a baby doesn't get you a free pass. You're already part of the household economy, and sooner or later you'll be expected to pull your weight, or at least hold a bucket. But for now, close your eyes, assuming you can ignore the biting, snuggle into your mouldy straw mattress, and dream sweet dreams of a world where bedsheets exist and pillows don't come with parasites. Because tomorrow's waiting, and so is your first taste of medieval family life. Congratulations. You've survived your first night in a bed made of straw, shared with every flea in the county. Now it's time to meet the rest of your medieval household, a term that's equal parts family reunion, petting zoo, and potential crime scene. Let's start with your siblings. Chances are you have plenty of them. Medieval parents aren't exactly worried about family planning. More kids means more hands to work the fields, fetch water, and guard the goats. So your older brother might be 7, already swinging a hoe bigger than his head, while your sister, a seasoned veteran at 5, is probably in charge of stirring the family's pottage pot. Kids grow up fast here, if they grow up at all. And let's not forget the other residents, the pigs, goats, chickens, and maybe even the occasional stray dog who's decided your one-room hut is as good a place as any to crash. These aren't barnyard animals you visit on weekends. They're roommates, loud, smelly, and utterly unbothered by the idea of personal space. You'll wake up with a chicken pecking at your foot, a pig snorting near your head, and the family cat staring at you with the kind of dead-eyed judgment that only medieval cats can muster. There's no nursery, no children's table, no pastel-painted playpen. You're part of the medieval open-concept living plan, where your bed, your kitchen, your dining area, and your stable are all, conveniently, one room. Privacy? That's a foreign concept, reserved for the afterlife. Maybe. For now, your entire family watches as you try to breathe, eat, and sleep without choking on goat hair. Your parents are here too, of course, though parenting in the Middle Ages is less about helicoptering and more about don't die, kid. Mum's busy churning butter, when there's any, weaving, or chasing after your older brother, who's about to feed the fire with the last of the winter's kindling. Dad's probably out in the fields, or in the tavern, or maybe both at once. When he's home, he's either fixing a broken tool, or reminding you that life's hard, and you'd better toughen up. Family life in the Middle Ages is less about hugs and bedtime stories, and more about survival, and, occasionally, mutual annoyance. If you're lucky, your parents will spare a glance your way when you cough, or maybe even hand you a chunk of bread to chew on if you're looking particularly scrawny. And let's talk about dinner time, if you can call it that. It's more like Scrape together whatever's left from yesterday's pot time. Meals are communal, and so is the bowl. Hygiene? Ha! You're dipping your grimy hands into the same pot everyone else has been using all week. It's a bonding experience, assuming you bond over sharing the same germs. Your siblings are your first teachers. They'll show you how to dig in the dirt, how to catch a rat, how to avoid stepping in the chicken droppings that somehow cover every inch of your dirt floor. They'll teach you how to swear under your breath so the priest doesn't hear, and how to dodge the occasional backhand from Dad when he's in a mood. And when you're not busy learning the finer points of medieval survival, you're probably sharing your straw mattress with 2 or 3 of them, all wriggling and scratching through the night. Bedtime stories are swapped for bedtime gossip, like which neighbour's pig escaped, who might be dying of plague, or whether that mysterious rash on your sister's arm means she's next on death's guest list. Love? Sure, in its own rough, unpolished way. A brother might whack you over the head for stealing his crust of bread, but he'll also chase off a neighbour's goose if it tries to peck you. A sister might roll her eyes when you cry from a skinned knee, but she'll also give you the biggest chunk of turnip when no one's looking. It's a rough and tumble world, but it's the only one you've got. And if you're going to make it to the age of 5, you'd better learn to navigate it fast, because soon you'll be expected to pitch in. No one gets a free ride, not even the baby. So nestle back into that straw mattress, ignoring the pig that's made itself at home beside you, and get ready for tomorrow's adventure. Because while your family might be a symphony of snoring, squabbling and suspicious smells, they're also your shield against the even harsher world beyond that crooked wooden door. You've made it through your first days as a medieval kid, born into a home that's 1 part barnyard, 1 part flea circus, and now it's time to confront the one element that ties it all together: the smell. And let's just say, it's not the kind of smell that fades into the background. It's the kind that punches you in the face every time you blink. First off, forget about the sweet scent of baby powder or lavender-scented laundry. In the Middle Ages, soap is a luxury item, if it even exists in your hovel. And laundry day? That's a medieval myth. Most folks wash their clothes once in a blue moon, which means every tunic, every scrap of cloth you own, smells like a wet dog's revenge. Multiply that by every member of your household, plus the pigs, goats, and that suspicious chicken in the corner, and you've got yourself a perfume that would make a modern garbage dump seem like a flower shop. The smell hits you the moment you open your eyes, assuming you managed to get any sleep between the lice bites and your older brother's snores. The air is thick, like soup, but less appetizing. A heady mix of sweat, straw, and the lingering aroma of yesterday's dinner, which was also the day before yesterday's dinner, wafts through the air like an invisible, unwelcome guest. Your mother's stirring the morning pot of pottage over the smoky hearth, and the scent of scorched cabbage does its best to mask the underlying odour of sweat, manure, and mildew that's been marinating since last winter. The hearth itself is more smoke than flame, filling the room with a haze that makes every breath a gamble between coughing and crying. Step outside. Surely the fresh air will help, right? Wrong. Outside is an olfactory horror show in its own right. The muddy street doubles as a toilet for humans and animals alike. Chamber pots are dumped right into the street because, let's be honest, no one's invented sewage systems that actually work. The word of the day is Gardeloo, a half-hearted warning before someone's dinner from last night becomes your new footbath. Everywhere you turn, the smell is waiting. It clings to your tunic, seeps into your hair, and follows you like a medieval poltergeist. Even the church, supposedly a sanctuary, reeks of incense mixed with the sweat of 100 unwashed parishioners. The priest's robes smell like mothballs and misery. If you think your nose is having a rough time, wait until you meet the family's animals. Pigs wander freely, leaving behind little gifts for your bare feet. The goats have an aroma that can only be described as fermented socks. And the chickens, well, let's just say they've never met a clean surface they didn't immediately decorate. Bathing? That's a dangerous luxury. People believe water opens the pores, letting in diseases that would otherwise bounce off your personal layer of grime. So instead of soap and water, most folks rely on a kind of natural perfume, a crust of sweat, dirt, and maybe a sprig of rosemary tucked in a cap if they're feeling fancy. You, however, aren't feeling fancy. You're feeling marinated. Even your siblings contribute to the grand medieval stinkscape. That younger brother who always seems to have something crusty on his face. It's not just leftover dinner. It's dinner, breakfast, and the last 3 days of toddler adventures. Your older sister? Her hair's a tangly masterpiece of lice and cooking smoke. And your dad? Let's just say after a day in the fields, he's a walking advertisement for why medieval people thought fresh air was dangerous. But hey, smell is just part of the atmosphere, like rain, or plague, or random violence. You get used to it because you have to. You find yourself ignoring the reek of the chamber pot in the corner, the sour tang of sweat-drenched tunics, the goat's breath in your face. After all, you've got bigger problems, like surviving long enough to actually worry about how you smell. Because in the Middle Ages, smell is everywhere, but so is danger. A whiff of rotten grain means spoiled food, and maybe ergot poisoning that'll have you hallucinating your way to an early grave. The stink of infected wounds signals a fever that's probably fatal. And that sweet, cloying odour drifting from the hut next door, that might be the plague. So breathe deep, if you dare, and remember, this is the medieval world, a place where every scent tells a story, most of them tragic. You'll learn to live with it, or you won't. But either way, it's time to face the day. Dirt, sweat, and all. Let's start with the most popular item on the medieval toy market. Dirt. That's right. Dirt. It's free, it's plentiful, and it's the one thing in the Middle Ages you can always count on. Dig in it. Smear it on your face. Throw it at your siblings. Dirt is the Swiss Army knife of medieval playthings. If you're especially lucky, you might even discover a worm or two. Congratulations, now you've got pets. Next up, sticks. Sticks are the holy grail of medieval entertainment. They're swords, staffs, shovels, and magic wands all rolled into one. With a good stick, you're a knight, a farmer, a sorcerer. Anything your dirt-smeared imagination can conjure up. Of course, your stick also doubles as a weapon to settle scores with your brother or defend yourself from the neighbour's goose. And if you're truly blessed by the gods of medieval fortune, you might find a rock. Not just any rock, mind you, a special rock. Maybe it's round, maybe it's pointy, but to you, it's a treasure. You'll cradle it in your filthy hands, show it off to your siblings, and then probably lose it in the mud within the hour. But hey, it was glorious while it lasted. Feeling fancy? Some kids get rag dolls if their mothers have a scrap of cloth to spare. These aren't exactly the Barbie dream houses of the medieval world. They're more like sad, limbless lumps of fabric stuffed with straw or leftover sheep's wool, their faces stitched on in a way that might haunt your nightmares. Still, it's a toy, sort of. And in this world, that's enough. Some kids, usually the ones whose parents know how to whittle, might have wooden animals, a rough approximation of a horse, maybe a pig with legs that snap off if you look at it funny. These humble carvings, chipped and splintered, double as farmyard props and battlefield casualties. But they're yours. And in the Middle Ages, ownership of anything at all is a big deal. For the more adventurous, or unfortunate children, there's always the dead bird option. Maybe it's a sparrow that flew into the thatched roof one unlucky morning. Or maybe it's a pigeon that couldn't outrun the neighbour's cat. Either way, it's a toy now, part trophy, part science experiment, part cautionary tale. You might poke it with a stick, try to see if it can fly again, it can't, or parade it around as a prize. Hygiene? Don't even ask. Death and disease are just part of the fun. Speaking of disease, some kids, especially the ones with parents who are skilled artisans, get toys that might actually survive a week or two. Maybe a carved top you can spin on the dirt floor, Maybe a tiny wooden cart, but don't get too attached. One wrong step, one misplaced pig hoof, and your precious toy is reduced to splinters. Nothing lasts long here, not even childhood. And when you're not inventing new ways to play with dirt, sticks, and dead birds, you're probably making up games with your siblings. Games that usually involve a lot of running, yelling, and possibly a few bruises. Tag, hide and seek, and let's see who can hold their breath the longest in the pigsty are all on the menu. Rules are optional, injuries are guaranteed. Every now and then, if you're near a market town, you might see a travelling peddler selling brightly painted toys, wooden knights, rattles, even a crude puppet or two. But those are luxuries reserved for the children of lords and merchants, not your dirt-encrusted self. So you watch from the sidelines, your eyes wide, your nose running, and then you go back to your trusty stick. Toys in the Middle Ages aren't about luxury or comfort. They're about survival. They're about making do with what you've got, and what you've got is a whole lot of nothing. But that doesn't mean you're not creative. In fact, your imagination is the most valuable toy you own. It's the difference between seeing a rat and seeing a noble steed, between a pile of straw and a fortress, between a dead bird and, well, okay, sometimes it's just a dead bird. So clutch that stick, smear that dirt, and keep your eyes open for your next treasure. Because tomorrow, your toys will be the least of your worries. So you've survived your first toy, a dirt-caked stick, and your proud display of dead birds. Now it's time to tackle the next medieval challenge: eating. Let's just say if you think your toys were sad, wait until you see what's on the menu. First things first, you're probably still on the milk diet. But forget those glossy breast is best campaigns with smiling nurses and lavender-scented lactation rooms. In the Middle Ages, breastfeeding is less about choice and more about necessity, assuming your mother's still around and not too busy stirring pottage, hauling water, or fighting off rats. If your mother's healthy enough and lucky enough to produce milk, congratulations. That means you're feeding at the source every chance you get. But medieval nutrition is about as reliable as a three-legged goat on an ice patch. Poor diet, disease, and the occasional famine can dry up a mother's milk faster than a thatched roof in July. If that happens, say hello to your new best friend, a wet nurse. Wet nurses are basically the medieval version of a milk ATM, but not exactly by choice. Sometimes they're relatives, sometimes neighbours, and sometimes women who've recently lost a baby and need the work. Sanitation? Forget it. The same woman might be milking the family cow before she gets to you. But hey, milk is milk, right? Once you're big enough to chew, or at least gum things to death, your culinary adventure really takes off. Get ready for a world of gruel, pottage, and whatever's not too mouldy. Porridge is a staple, a gritty, lumpy, watery affair made from whatever grain your family can scrounge. If you're lucky, it's oats or barley. If you're unlucky, it's a suspicious blend of weeds, acorn flour, and something that might once have been a root vegetable. Let's not forget the lumps. Oh, the lumps. Because medieval cooking is an exercise in optimism. Hope it boils long enough to kill whatever's living in it. Even then, you're not exactly safe. There's no guarantee that the pot your dinner came from was cleaned since the last plague year. Sometimes you might get a crust of bread, a medieval brick of sour, dense, half-baked dough that could double as a blunt weapon. It's dark, chewy, and packed with enough grit to sand down your baby teeth. If it's been around long enough to sprout a little something green on top, well, just scrape it off. Mold's only a problem if it kills you, and that's a risk everyone's willing to take. Meat? Forget about it. Unless your family is suspiciously wealthy, spoiler, they're not, you'll see meat on holidays. Maybe. A scrap of salted pork if your father's done well, or if the village's biggest pig met an untimely end. Most of the time, your protein comes from the occasional beetle that fell into the pot, or maybe the fly that couldn't escape your bowl. Don't complain. That's extra calories. Vegetables are a seasonal delight, meaning you get them when they're in season and not already fermenting. Turnips, onions, leeks, stuff that grows in the dirt and tastes like it too. Maybe your mum throws in a few herbs to cut the bitterness, but let's be honest, she's got bigger problems than your picky palate. Fruit, huh? You might see a berry or two in summer, but by winter, your best bet is something shriveled and suspicious. Dried fruit is a noble fantasy, reserved for the fancy folk. For you, a dried apple might as well be a holy relic. And then there's the water. It's not safe. Ever. Every stream, every well, every bucket is a potential death sentence filled with parasites, animal droppings, and enough disease to wipe out a small kingdom. That's why even toddlers drink beer. Not the fun kind that'll have you singing sea shanties by the age of 5, but small beer, weak, watery, and just safe enough to keep you from dying before your next birthday. Feeding time in the Middle Ages is less about nutrition and more about survival. You eat because if you don't, you'll die. And even then, it's a gamble. Every meal's a mystery stew of questionable origins. Every sip a potential plague. But hey, that's just the way it goes. You get used to it, or you don't. So hold your wooden spoon tight, scrape the mould off your bread, and hope that tonight's pottage didn't come from the same bucket the pig drank from. Because tomorrow, it's time to tackle your next medieval milestone. Teething. So you've managed to keep yourself alive on a diet of gruel, stale bread, and questionable water. Congratulations. Now it's time for the next medieval milestone. Teething. Modern parents might talk about teething like it's a minor inconvenience, a drool-soaked bib and some extra crankiness. But for a medieval baby, teething is less of a developmental stage and more of a medieval endurance test. Let's start with the obvious. No baby Tylenol. No fancy teething rings cooled in the fridge. No paediatrician on speed dial. Pain relief is what you get when you outlive the pain. Until then, you're on your own, and it's not pretty. Your gums are swelling like medieval turnips. Every tooth pushing its way through feels like a tiny dagger slicing its way into your mouth. You're drooling enough to water a small vegetable patch, and your cries, oh those cries, echo through the hut like the wails of a tormented spirit. Which, to be fair, is exactly how you feel. Your mother tries her best, but let's be real, she's got 10 other things to do, including cooking, cleaning, and praying the pigs don't eat the laundry. Her idea of teething relief might involve giving you a crust of bread to gnaw on, which is about as effective as using a rock to treat a headache. That bread is so hard it could double as a weapon. Maybe that's the point. At least if you throw it at your brother, it'll hurt him more than it helps you. If you're lucky, and that's a big if, someone might suggest tying a cloth soaked in wine around your gums. Because nothing says medieval childcare like giving your teething infant a starter kit for alcoholism. Not that wine's any more sterile than the local water supply, but at least it's safer than, well, no, actually it's not. But people think it is, so bottoms up. Some local healers might offer more creative solutions. Maybe they'll rub some questionable herbs on your gums. Maybe they'll wave a chicken feather over your head while chanting something that sounds suspiciously like gibberish. Or maybe they'll recommend a piece of bone to chew on, a relic from the family dinner last winter. Hygiene? That's a problem for the future. And let's not forget the superstitions. Medieval parents love a good superstition. Some might hang an amulet around your neck, something blessed by the local priest or stolen from the neighbour's goat, believing it'll chase away the pain. Others might mutter prayers to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of toothaches, in the hope she's paying attention. Spoiler, she's probably not. She's got enough on her plate with grown-ups moaning about their rotting molars. Meanwhile, you're still screaming. Your siblings are rolling their eyes. Your father's wondering if a walk in the fields might be quieter, and your mother's weighing the pros and cons of giving you more wine-soaked cloth. The hut smells like sweat, straw, and desperation. And let's be honest, you're contributing your fair share to that atmosphere. You're also drooling like a fountain, soaking everything in a 6-foot radius, The straw mattress, already a biological experiment in mold and lice, now doubles as your personal drool reservoir. Your tunic, damp and crusty. The family dog, eyeballing you with a mix of pity and self-preservation, trying to decide whether to flee or join in the chorus of misery. The worst part? You can't even blame your parents. They're doing the best they can in a world where healthcare is a loose concept involving rusty knives and holy water. A crying baby might mean you're teething, or it might mean you're dying of some disease no one can name. Either way, they've got to keep going, feeding the goats, patching the roof, and praying the neighbour's pig doesn't eat your dinner. Eventually, the tooth pokes through. Congratulations, you've just sprouted your first medieval chomper. It's not much to look at, yellowish, probably crooked, but hey, it's yours. That's one more step toward adulthood, one more milestone on the path to helping with chores and catching rats for dinner. And guess what? There's a whole mouthful of teeth still to come, each one ready to carve its own path of misery. But at least you've survived the first wave. You're still alive, still drooling, and still part of the medieval family circus. And now that your gums have calmed down, temporarily, it's time to tackle your next challenge. Because in the Middle Ages, there's always a next challenge. So, you survived teething. Congratulations, champion. You've got your first medieval tooth, and you're ready to sink it into, well, probably some mouldy bread. But before you start celebrating like it's a festival feast, let's talk about the real challenge that every medieval kid faces. Staying alive long enough to remember your 5th birthday, if you even know when that is. In the Middle Ages, turning 5 isn't just a milestone, it's a statistical miracle. Childhood is a survival contest, where everything's trying to kill you. Disease, hunger, accidents, and sometimes your siblings. Half the kids you meet today won't make it past tomorrow. That's not pessimism, that's medieval math. Let's start with the diseases. The Middle Ages is basically a breeding ground for every illness imaginable. Smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, pick a plague, any plague. They're all on the menu, and they're not picky about whose bed they land in. Your runny nose could turn into a fever, a rash, or a fatal infection overnight. No antibiotics, no vaccines, just the local healer muttering about humours and maybe bleeding you with a knife that's been used for everything, from trimming your dad's beard to gutting fish. And don't forget the Black Death, lurking in the background like the ultimate party crasher. Every so often, it sweeps through town, clearing out half the population. Even when the plague's not in town, fleas and rats are always ready to make sure you're never truly alone. But let's say you dodge the worst of the germs. Good job. Now you've got to eat. Except food is a lottery every single day. A bad harvest? That's half the village's kids buried before winter's done. Even when there's enough to go around, you're still dealing with pottage that's mostly water, bread that could break teeth, and water that's less refreshing drink and more Russian roulette. If the food doesn't get you, malnutrition will. Weak kids make easy prey for the next passing infection. Then there's accidents. You're living in a wooden hut with an open fire and a floor made of dirt. Your toys include sticks, rocks, and, if you're lucky, a suspiciously sharp knife you're supposed to help with chores. Sibling rivalry takes on a whole new meaning when your brother might decide to show you his new wrestling move, right into the fire pit. Speaking of siblings, let's talk about them. Medieval brothers and sisters are less about warm hugs and more about learning the hard way who's bigger, stronger, and better at stealing the last crust of bread. An older brother might be your first teacher in the fine art of dodging punches, while your sister is perfecting the silent grab and run when the family's cheese is on the table. Don't be fooled by that sweet smile. She'll trip you in the dirt for the last onion if she has to. And then there's the environment. Winters are harsh and endless. Summer brings heat, flies, and diseases that thrive in the filth of medieval life. A sudden rainstorm can flood your entire home, and your bed faster than you can say bad luck. Every corner of your world is a potential hazard. Step wrong in the yard, twist your ankle, and suddenly you're that kid who can't help with chores, and that's a luxury your family might not afford to keep around. Meanwhile, your parents are doing their best. But let's be honest, they're not exactly helicoptering over your every move. They're too busy scraping together enough food to keep everyone alive. If you're crying, they'll give you a rag to chew on. If you're coughing, they'll give you a prayer. And if you're really unlucky, they'll give you a quick confession, just in case. It's no wonder so many kids never make it past their 5th birthday. But if you do, if you manage to dodge the disease, the starvation, the rats, the cold, and your brother's headlock, something incredible happens. Suddenly, you're not just a child anymore. You're a small adult, expected to work in the fields, fetch water, and help keep the household afloat. Because in the Middle Ages, childhood is less a time of innocence and more a brief internship in survival. But before you get too comfortable with the idea of being a full-fledged medieval adult in training, remember, the dangers never really leave. You just get better at ignoring them. So count your blessings, if you can count at all, and get ready for your next medieval milestone, meeting the doctor. So you've managed to dodge the plague, outwit your siblings, and survive the first 5 years of medieval life. Congratulations, you've unlocked the next level. Medical care, if you can call it that. Because in the Middle Ages, your doctor isn't the white-robed, stethoscope-wielding hero from modern hospitals. Nope. Your doctor is also the local barber, and his tools are enough to make your teeth chatter and your knees knock. Let's start with the basics. The medieval doctor is more of a part-time jack-of-all-trades than a dedicated healer. Need a haircut? He's your man. Shave your scraggly beard. He's got the blade. Got a suspicious boil on your leg? Or a fever that might just kill you? You guessed it. He's also the guy you call. Because in medieval Europe, barber and surgeon are basically the same job. His qualifications? Let's see. He's probably apprenticed with another barber for a few years, learned how to sharpen a blade, and picked up a few helpful tips about bloodletting from the local monk. Medical school? Forget it. The closest thing he's seen to a textbook is a stained scroll that probably spent time as a tablecloth. But hey, he's got a steady hand and a rusty knife. What more could you want? Let's talk about that knife. It's his pride and joy, used for everything from trimming beards to lancing boils. Cleanliness? That's a modern fantasy. This blade's been places, some of them unspeakable, and it's never seen a drop of soap in its life. Rusty? Absolutely. He might give it a quick wipe on his tunic before he sticks it in your skin, but you can practically see the tetanus dancing on the edge. Bloodletting is the star of his medical repertoire. Got a fever? Must be too much blood. A headache? Clearly too much blood. Stubbed your toe? Let's bleed that sucker. He'll tie a strip of cloth around your arm, slice open a vein, and watch your life force drip into a bowl. It's all very scientific, according to humours at least. Whether you actually feel better is beside the point. If you survive the procedure, it's considered a success, but bleeding isn't his only trick. He's got leeches, fat, wriggling leeches. He'll slap them on your skin and let them go to town, sucking away your bad humours, one drop at a time. If that doesn't work, he might suggest a purgative, a mix of herbs designed to clear your system from both ends. The results? Explosive, humiliating, and sometimes fatal. But hey, at least your humours are balanced on your way out. Let's say you've got a toothache. No problem. The barber surgeon is also your dentist. His treatment plan? Yank that offending tooth right out of your skull, no anaesthesia required. He might wedge your head between his knees, give you a piece of wood to bite down on, and then go at it with his pliers, which may have doubled as blacksmith tongs last week. Scream all you want. No one's coming to save you. Got a nasty cut from playing medieval tag with your brother? The barber's your guy. He'll slap on a poultice of questionable herbs, and maybe even cauterize the wound with a red-hot iron. Infection? That's just the will of God. A good dose of prayer, Maybe some incense and a fresh bandage, if he's feeling generous, is the best you can hope for. And let's not forget the surgeries. Yes, surgeries. You might be unlucky enough to need one. Maybe it's a hernia from lifting too many buckets of slop. Or maybe you've developed a suspicious lump that no one wants to talk about. Either way, the barber's ready, knife in hand, cloth apron stained with who knows what. Anesthesia, a stiff drink and a prayer. His technique? Cut, hope, and cross your fingers. Your parents might watch the whole procedure, muttering prayers to St. Blaise or St. Apollonia, hoping the patron saints of throat ailments and toothaches will step in to save you. But in the end, it's just you, the barber, and his rusty blade. So the next time you see your friendly neighbourhood barber, remember he's more than just the guy who trims your hair. He's your lifeline, your worst nightmare, and the last person you'll see before you pass out from pain, or from the blood loss he's so proud of administering. But hey, at least he's local. And after you've survived his tender mercies, you'll be ready for the next challenge, working the fields like a miniature adult. Now it's time for a little break from chores, because even in the Middle Ages, kids need playtime. But don't get too excited. This isn't a cheerful skip through a rose garden. It's more like dodgeball, but the ball is filled with rats and disease. Welcome to playtime in the plague years. Let's set the scene. You're a medieval kid living in a hut that smells like a combination of boiled cabbage and goat sweat. Outside, the air isn't exactly fresh, more like a damp cloud of manure and smoke, but it's still better than being inside with your siblings, who are likely in the middle of a lice-fueled wrestling match. So you head out to find some fun, if fun can even exist with death lurking around every corner. Your first toy? Dirt, of course. It's always there, waiting to be dug, shaped, and occasionally eaten. You might make little dirt castles, or graves for your imaginary enemies. If you're especially creative, you'll throw it at your siblings and call it a game. Just don't expect anyone to clean it off you afterward. Now let's talk about your fellow players. Every kid in town, assuming they're still breathing, is your potential playmate. But remember, everyone's carrying something. A cough, a rash, a suspicious boil. It's like a live-action game of plague or just mud. Spoiler, it's probably both. But hey, you're 5, and you've already survived the Black Death once. Maybe. Tag is a classic medieval game, though it's less about speed and more about who can run without tripping in the mud. You tag your friend, who might also be infected, and then it's his turn to chase you, spreading germs and laughter in equal measure. Nothing like a game that doubles as a public health crisis. For the adventurous, there's always rat toss. Catch one of the many rodents that roam your village, hold it by the tail, and see who can fling it the farthest. Extra points if it lands in the neighbour's soup. Hygiene? Never heard of it. Just don't let it bite you, unless you want to find out firsthand how fast a fever can cook your brain. Hide and seek takes on a whole new meaning when half the hiding places are filled with suspicious lumps that used to be other kids. You duck behind a haystack and hope that weird smell is just manure. And if it's not, well, that's another lesson learned. Death is always closer than you think in the plague years. Sometimes, older kids might invite you to watch a hanging or a punishment in the village square. That's prime entertainment in these parts. Nothing says fun like watching a thief get his hand chopped off. You're learning important life lessons about medieval justice, even if you're also learning how to hold your nose and not faint. And let's not forget the fun of plague-related roleplay. Maybe you'll pretend to be the town crier, ringing a rusty bell and shouting, "Bring out your dead!" Or maybe you're a doctor, stuffing a sack with herbs and pretending to ward off the evil spirits. That's right, Plague Doctor cosplay. Not exactly Comic-Con, but it'll do. Your parents aren't going to tell you to wash your hands before dinner. Hand washing is for people with too much time on their hands and not enough real problems. If you come home with plague boils, it's just another day in the Middle Ages. Your mother might dab you with vinegar and hope for the best. Meanwhile, you're already planning tomorrow's game of Chase the Chicken. But playtime isn't all about rats and diseases. Sometimes there's laughter too, like when your brother's pants fall off while he's climbing a fence, or when your sister tries to race a goat and ends up face first in the mud. Even in the middle of chaos, kids find a way to laugh. Because in the Middle Ages, playtime isn't about innocence. It's about distraction. It's about finding something, anything, that lets you forget, for a moment, that death could drop by any minute. It's about being a child in a world that doesn't care how old you are, only that you keep working, keep surviving, and keep dodging the plague. So go ahead, throw that rat, chase that goose, and roll in that suspicious puddle, because tomorrow you might be the one they're ringing the bell for. So, you've survived your plague-infested playtime, managed not to get bitten by a rabid rat, and even made it through a few beatings at school. Good job, little medieval survivor. But now it's time for the real education, one that no one can escape. Welcome to Religion 101, where the lessons come fast, the guilt comes faster, and the syllabus is basically confess, repent, repeat. Religion isn't just a part of your life in the Middle Ages. It's the glue that holds the entire, lice-ridden world together. The church controls everything: your calendar, your holidays, your education, if you get any, your moral code, and your eternal fate. And if you're hoping for an easy pass, forget it. Religion in the Middle Ages is less gentle shepherd and more fire and brimstone babysitter. Your lessons start young. You're barely out of the cradle when the local priest dips your head in holy water and claims your soul for the church. Baptism, your first introduction to a lifetime of obligations. Congratulations, you're officially on the hook for every sin you'll ever commit. And trust me, there will be plenty. Your education continues with Sunday Mass, which is less about learning and more about surviving the world's longest sermon delivered in Latin, a language you absolutely don't understand. The priest might as well be reciting an alien grocery list. But that doesn't matter. You stand, kneel, mumble, and try not to fall asleep. Because falling asleep in church? Sin. Speaking of sins, let's talk confession. By the time you can talk, you're expected to confess every nasty little thought you've ever had. Did you think about stealing your brother's turnip? Confess it. Did you wish the neighbour's goat would explode? Confess that too. And if you don't confess, well, that's another sin, one that could land you in eternal fire. And oh, the sins. The church has a list that's longer than your mother's laundry. Swearing, sin. Missing mass, sin. Smiling at a girl, sin. Breathing too hard on a holy day, probably a sin. Basically, if it feels even remotely fun, it's probably a ticket straight to hell. Of course, confession is only half the fun. Once you confess, you get a penance, a little spiritual homework to balance the scales. Maybe you have to recite a few prayers, or maybe you're stuck kneeling on cold stone floors until your knees feel like they're filled with rusty nails. Medieval parents treat penance like a cure-all. Stubbed your toe? Pray. Lost the family chicken? Pray. Caught the plague? Pray harder. Fear is the main dish at this spiritual buffet. The priests describe hell in graphic detail. Lakes of fire, demons with pitchforks, eternal wailing. And they do it with a gleam in their eyes that suggests they're a little too excited about the whole thing. You learn early that God is always watching. He's like the ultimate medieval parent, omnipresent, omnipotent, and extremely disappointed in your behaviour. But it's not all fire and damnation. Sometimes the church throws a feast day, where everyone takes a break from working themselves to death to celebrate a saint or two. You might even get a loaf of bread or a cup of weak ale. But don't let the party fool you. Skip the wrong holy day, and you're back in the confessional faster than you can say, mea culpa. And let's not forget the saints. Every town has its favourites. St. Blaise for throat problems, St. Apollonia for toothaches, St. Anthony for lost items, like the family pig. Their statues stand in the church, staring down at you with that look that says, "I'm watching you, kid." You learn to pray to them early and often, because you never know when you'll need a celestial favour to avoid the next outbreak of boils. Of course, while all this is going on, your parents are counting every penny to pay tithes. The church takes 1/10 of everything: grain, eggs, chickens, your last scrap of dignity. It's like a medieval subscription service, except there's no cancellation option, and you'd better pay up or risk having your soul excommunicated faster than you can say Amen. Religion isn't just a part of life, it is life. It dictates when you work, when you rest, what you eat, and who you can marry. It's the reason you're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if that weird thought about the neighbour's goat will earn you a one-way ticket to the fiery pits of hell. So kneel, confess, repent, and repeat. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church is always watching. You've confessed, repented, and repeated, all while the priest gave you that look that says, "I'm watching your soul like a hawk with trust issues." Now that your eternal fate is momentarily secured, it's time to face the next chapter of your medieval adventure. Education. Except, spoiler alert, education is a luxury you probably won't get. In the Middle Ages, if you're a peasant kid, school is more like a rumour, and work is your reality. Let's start with the school part. Imagine a room, small, damp, and darker than a crypt, where the only light comes from a few candles sputtering in the draught. That's your medieval classroom, if you're lucky enough to have one. Most kids never step foot inside, but if your parents are weirdly invested in your future, or you live near a monastery, you might get a chance to sit on a splintery bench and listen to a grumpy man in a robe drone on about Latin conjugations and the Psalms. Latin, by the way, is the language of the educated elite, and also the language you're least likely to understand. It's like someone decided to teach you advanced calculus before you even know how to count. But hey, you're expected to memorize it anyway, because God wants you to, apparently. The priest might smack your knuckles with a stick if you get it wrong, so no pressure. Reading and writing? Not unless you're aiming for the monastery, because books are more valuable than most of the livestock in your village. A single handwritten manuscript could take a monk a year to produce. You think your mother's going to waste time and resources on that when she's already trying to keep you from dying of hunger? Exactly. So that's the school option. Dark, cold, painful, and reserved for a lucky few. For everyone else, including you most likely, it's straight to work. Because in the Middle Ages, the family economy is a team sport, and you've been drafted. Congratulations, here's your shovel. Your first job is probably helping with the simplest, dirtiest chores. That means chasing chickens, pulling weeds, fetching water from a suspiciously green pond, and maybe even picking lice out of your baby brother's hair. Family bonding, medieval style. You might think you're too young, but in the Middle Ages, if you could walk, you could work. Fieldwork is your next step in this career ladder of despair. By the time you're 7 or 8, what we'd now call first or second grade, you're following your parents into the fields to weed, plant, and harvest. Tools? A hoe, a stick, maybe your bare hands. Gloves? Dream on. Boots? That's for rich folks and lords. You get your feet and a prayer that you don't step on something sharp, like the neighbour's rusty plough blade or a dead rat. Think you'll get a lunch break? Sure, if you call a crust of bread and some watery beer a break. Sit on the ground, chew on your bread brick, and watch the local priest ride by on his fancy horse. Maybe he'll bless you as he goes, or maybe he'll remind you to say your prayers and pay your tithes. Either way, your lunch hour is about 10 minutes, and then it's back to work. Some kids might find themselves apprenticed to a tradesman, a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. It sounds fancy until you realise that apprentice is medieval for underpaid labourer who does all the worst jobs. Fetch the water, stoke the fire, sweep the filth, hold the goat while the master shapes its hide into next month's shoes. You might learn a trade, eventually, but first you'll learn how to take orders and dodge blows. Meanwhile, the other kids who didn't even get the chance to apprentice, they're stuck at home, spinning wool, mending torn tunics, watching siblings and grinding grain. No one's asking what you want to be when you grow up. Because guess what? You already are grown up, at least as far as the family's concerned. And let's not forget the most important medieval work assignment, staying alive. Everything you do, every chore, every field, every splintery bench you sit on, has one goal: survival. Food on the table, a roof that doesn't collapse, and maybe enough energy left to say your prayers before the lice start biting again. So, school or work? For the lucky few, there's a priest with a stick and a Latin primer. For the rest of us, it's endless chores, back-breaking labour, and the occasional rat chase. But don't worry, because next comes the highlight of your medieval career. Bedtime. You've just finished your shift in the fields, where you've become intimately familiar with mud, weeds, and your own aching spine. But don't get too comfortable. Your education isn't over yet, because even in the Middle Ages, there's learning to be done. And by learning, I mean a delightful combo of reading, writing, and, because it's the 1300s, witch hunts. Welcome to the medieval education system, where ignorance is definitely not bliss, but knowledge might get you burned. Let's start with reading. If you're one of the select few who's managed to escape the fields for a chance at literacy, maybe your parents bribed a priest or you've got a suspiciously ambitious uncle, your lessons begin in the most exciting place imaginable. A cold, damp room that smells like old books and damp wool. The teacher, probably a stern-faced priest or a monk with a perpetual frown, greets you with the warmth of a winter plague. The first thing you'll learn is the alphabet, but forget about ABC songs or colourful picture books. No, you get a wooden board with letters carved into it. Think of it as the world's most boring tablet. You'll trace the letters with your finger, over and over, until your eyes cross or the board gives you splinters. Every mistake earns you a swift rap on the knuckles from the teacher's trusty rod. Education with a side of corporal punishment. Writing's even more fun. Parchment is expensive. Sheep don't just grow on trees, so mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they're expensive. Ink is made from crushed oak galls and iron, which means it smells as bad as it sounds. Your quill is a sharpened goose feather, which works about as well as you'd expect. One wrong move, and your letter looks like a medieval ink blot test. And that's if you're lucky enough to get a quill. Some kids make do with sticks in the dirt, an education that's as literal as it gets. Even if you master reading and writing, that doesn't mean you're free from danger, because knowledge is power, and in the Middle Ages, power makes people nervous. You know who else read and wrote things? Heretics, troublemakers, and of course witches. That's right, witches. The Middle Ages was like one big never-ending episode of Who's a Witch, starring everyone from your neighbour with the suspicious herbs to that old woman who talks to her cat. Education was supposed to make you smarter, but sometimes it just made you a better target. Let's say you're a girl who's learned a bit of reading from your older brother, or maybe you've picked up a few herbal remedies from your mother. Congratulations, you're one step closer to a witch hunt. Someone gets sick, it's probably your fault. The cow dies, must be witchcraft. The priest's beer goes sour, time to round up the pitchforks. But hey, even boys aren't safe. Ask too many questions in class. Maybe you're a heretic. Know too much about natural science? Clearly, the devil's taught you his secrets. In a world where most people believe diseases are punishment from God, and lightning is divine wrath, curiosity is dangerous. And when the witch hunts start, because they always do, it's not like you can rely on logic to save you. Trials are less about evidence, and more about proving you can float in a pond or survive being pricked with a hot iron. Survive the test, and you're guilty. Die during the test, and you're innocent. Either way, you're probably toast, literally. Meanwhile, the church is always watching. They might let you learn to read, so you can follow along in the Psalms, but don't get any funny ideas about questioning the official narrative. Literacy is a privilege, but it's also a leash. They'll let you read what they want you to read, and anything else, say, a suspicious herbal recipe or a curious astronomy chart, might earn you a one-way ticket to the village square's main event. So yes, education in the Middle Ages is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you might learn enough Latin to impress the priest. On the other hand, you might learn too much and end up on the wrong end of a pitchfork. It's a fine line, and most kids learn to toe it carefully. But knowledge does give you a tiny sliver of power. Maybe you'll help your family avoid the worst of the fevers by knowing which plants aren't poison. Maybe you'll write a letter someday that changes your luck. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to read the sign outside the tavern that says, "Closed due to plague," and know to run the other way. So pick up that wooden board, dip that smelly quill, and pray the teacher's in a good mood. Because in the Middle Ages, knowledge might save you, or it might get you killed. Either way, the lesson's the same. Read carefully, write cautiously, and watch your back. You've survived reading, writing, and the occasional witch hunt. Congratulations, you literate little risk taker. But just because you can read the Psalms doesn't mean you're off the hook for the rest of your medieval education. Because in the Middle Ages, knowledge doesn't buy you a ticket to leisure. It buys you a shovel, a pitchfork, and a front row seat to the endless grind of peasant chores. Forget recess. The medieval world doesn't do breaks. There's no bell ringing to signal time for hopscotch. Your schedule runs on the sun, the seasons, and the urgent needs of a household that depends on every warm body, no matter how small or smelly. Let's start with the morning. While you're still half asleep, the rooster, your arch-nemesis, starts shrieking like a demon with a vendetta. That's your alarm clock, and it doesn't have a snooze button. You're up before the frost has even considered leaving the ground. First chore, fetch water. Because every task begins with water, and that water's not coming from a tap. It's coming from the communal well at the edge of the village, and by the time you get there, there's a line. And that's just the warm-up. After you've wrestled the bucket home without dumping half of it on yourself, it's time to feed the animals. Chickens, goats, pigs, or whatever else the family's managed to scrape together. The pigs might try to bite you. The goats will definitely headbutt you. The chickens? They're tiny balls of fury with wings. You'll learn to respect their beady eyes and sharp beaks. Fast. Then it's on to the fields. If you thought your education was rough, welcome to agriculture, where you learn to appreciate every weed, every rock, and every clod of dirt that dares defy your hoe. Your back is your teacher now, and every bend, every lift, every pull is a lesson in survival. Pull the weeds, sow the seeds, and if the weather's bad, tough luck. The crops won't wait for your tantrums. If you're lucky enough to avoid field duty for a day, guess what? There's plenty to do at home. Grinding grain, spinning wool, patching clothes, or helping your mother scrub the family's one set of garments in water that's closer to sludge than anything you'd want touching your skin. Soap, a luxury. A rag and a prayer are your best bet. Meals are no picnic either. You might help your mother cook, if you can call it that. Tossing random vegetables into a pot of water and hoping it doesn't turn into plague soup. Stirring with a stick that's seen more blisters than your father's hands. A dash of salt, if you can spare it, then back to work before your stomach even realizes it's supposed to be full. And let's not forget the firewood. If you think fetching water was tough, try carrying an armload of damp sticks that weigh more than you do. Splinters? Call them medieval merit badges. If you don't keep that fire burning, you're all freezing tonight. You're not just a child. You're an essential part of the household's heating system. The best part? You're doing all this while covered in a fine dusting of medieval grime. You smell like a goat that's been dipped in old beer. The itch from the lice is constant, and if you scratch too hard, you'll draw blood. Your nails are black with dirt, your hair is matted, and your tunic, your one tunic, smells like it's planning to declare independence and run away. When the sun finally starts to set, and your arms feel like they might detach and walk off without you, there's still more to do. You might need to help repair the roof, mend a fence, or chase away the neighbour's pig that keeps rooting in your family's cabbage patch. Because in the medieval world, the workday doesn't end when you're tired. It ends when the work's done, or when you collapse. And even then, your parents might ask for one more chore. Because you're not just a kid, you're the medieval version of a dishwasher, a farmhand, a tailor, and a security guard, all rolled into one undersized, underfed package. So yeah, no recess here. Playtime is what happens when the sun goes down, and even then, it's probably just you falling asleep in a pile of straw that smells suspiciously like goat. But hey, you survived another day, and tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because that's life in the Middle Ages. No breaks, no complaints, and no chance of a vacation. So you've slogged through a full day of chores that would make a modern gym class look like a vacation spa. Your hands are blistered, your back's screaming, and your one tunic now smells like the barn's reject pile. But don't think you're getting sympathy at home. Welcome to the warm, fuzzy embrace of medieval family life, where Dad's belt wasn't just for holding up his pants, and quality time often included shouting, scolding, and the occasional well-aimed slipper. Let's start with Dad. He's the head of the household, or at least that's what the priest keeps reminding everyone from the pulpit. He's judge, jury, and executioner, all rolled into one sunburned, dirt-caked package. His job is to keep the family alive, which means he's under constant stress. Failed crops, bandits, taxes. He's got a list of worries longer than the family laundry line. And guess who's at the bottom of that list? You. When Dad gets home from the fields, he's tired, hungry, and probably a bit drunk, because ale is safer to drink than water, and he's definitely earned it after a day of ploughing, cursing, and trying not to collapse. If dinner's not ready, or the kids are fighting, or the goat's eaten the last of the onions, well, that's where the belt comes in. In medieval times, discipline is as normal as lice. Spare the rod and spoil the child? Forget it. Spare the rod, and the whole village thinks your kid's a demon spawn. Dad's belt isn't fancy, just a thick strip of leather that's seen as much action as his plough. But it does the job. A quick snap across the backside is considered a healthy dose of medieval parenting. And it's not just Dad dishing it out. Mum's no pushover either. She might not have a belt, but she's got a wooden spoon with your name on it. She's the one who keeps the household running, cooking, mending, cleaning, spinning, while also managing an army of snot-nosed kids. If you spill the milk or leave the gate open so the pigs run riot, she'll correct your behaviour with a swift, no-nonsense whack. It's all part of the package deal. Older siblings get in on the fun too. Being the eldest is basically an unpaid internship in medieval management. They get to boss you around, blame you for everything, and occasionally use you as a test dummy for whatever suspicious game they've invented with a stick and a dead frog. If you try to tattle, Dad's belt is waiting in the wings. But before you start thinking it's all doom and gloom, let's remember that family is also your lifeline. They're the ones who patch your tunic when it tears, share their crust of bread when there's not enough, and huddle together for warmth when the thatch roof leaks. Dad might have a short temper, but he's also the one who taught you how to plant barley and chase away wolves. Mum might swing that spoon, but she's also the one who bandages your cuts and teaches you which herbs might not kill you. Family dinners, if you can call them that, are the closest thing to quality time. Everyone squats around the communal pot of pottage, stirred for days, seasoned with luck, and eats with wooden spoons, hoping to snag a turnip before your brother's grubby hands get there. Conversation is limited. Someone coughs, someone scratches, someone asks for more. If Dad's in a good mood, he might grunt something encouraging. If not, silence is the best policy. And let's not forget the unspoken rule of medieval life: loyalty. You might curse your siblings when they steal your share of the bread, but if the neighbour's kid tries it, you're expected to defend your own with sticks, rocks, or whatever's handy. Blood is thicker than beer, after all. Sometimes, despite the belt and the wooden spoon, there's laughter. Maybe your brother's pants rip open while he's climbing the fence, Or your sister accidentally dyes the laundry pink, well, brownish pink, with a suspicious herb. These are the moments that remind you why you keep going, why you survive the chores, the belt, and the lice. So yes, family dynamics in the Middle Ages are a complicated tapestry of duty, discipline, and desperation. Dad's belt keeps you in line, but it's also a reminder that life is tough and survival is a team sport. You might be the team's water boy, but you're still on the roster. After surviving Dad's belt and Mum's wooden spoon, and let's not forget your older brother's creative games involving dead frogs, it's time to talk about the one thing you can't escape, no matter how fast you run: your clothes, or more accurately, your one piece of clothing. Welcome to the wardrobe of the medieval child. One tunic, a lifetime of itching. Picture this. You wake up from your lumpy straw bed, which smells suspiciously like old goat, and drag yourself toward the day's chores. The sun's barely up, and so are the fleas. You reach for your tunic, because that's all you've got. Forget about socks, underpants, or shoes that actually fit. Medieval fashion is the definition of minimalism. Your tunic is made of coarse wool or linen, something that once might have been soft, but now feels like 1,000 tiny needles poking you from every direction. And it's not even yours, really. It was probably your older siblings, or maybe even your dad's, from when he was a scrawny lad. It's patched in places you didn't even know could tear, and it's so stained that even the local pigs would turn up their snouts at it. Laundry day? That's a medieval joke. If the tunic gets washed at all, it's once in a blue moon, and by washed, we mean it's slapped against a rock in cold, dirty water, then hung in the wind to dry stiff as a board. By the time you wriggle back into it, it's as comfortable as wearing a medieval porcupine. And let's talk about the colour. Dirt. The moment you step outside, the dust, the sweat, the animal droppings, everything clings to that tunic like it's the latest fashion trend. Even if your mother originally dyed it with plants to give it a nice earthy tone, by now it's all the same glorious shade of medieval brown. Of course, your tunic isn't the only thing making your life miserable. Underneath, you've got... Wait, never mind. You've got nothing. Underwear is for fancy people with too much time on their hands. You're going commando under a tunic that hasn't seen soap in months. Every scratch, every chafe is a reminder that comfort is a concept for the next millennium. And don't get me started on shoes, if you're even lucky enough to have them. They're made of stiff, untreated leather that feels like walking with a pair of meat grinders strapped to your feet. Most of the time, though, you're barefoot. Every rock, thorn, and suspicious puddle is a potential enemy in the great battle of your feet versus the world. If your family is slightly better off, like one step above starving, you might have a belt. Not the fancy kind that holds up pants, because pants are for lords and their fancy courtly friends. This belt is a strip of leather or rope that's seen more use tying up the goat than holding anything fashionable together. It's the one accessory you own, and it's probably stolen by your older brother every time he needs to tie a sack of barley. Now, let's talk about lice. They're the uninvited guests who come with every tunic. They don't care if your tunic's made of wool, linen, or something that once resembled cloth. They're here for the long haul, setting up little lice condominiums in every seam. You scratch until your skin feels raw, and still they multiply. Forget perfume. Your signature scent is eau de medieval vermin. So, you wear that tunic every day. You sweat in it, sleep in it, work in it, and probably die in it. Because that's how medieval life works. One tunic, endless chores, and an ongoing relationship with the local flea population. And when it finally falls apart, because even medieval textiles can't last forever, your mother patches it with whatever scrap of cloth she can find. Maybe it's a piece of an old sack. Maybe it's part of the neighbour's discarded tunic. No one's asking questions. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's all about keeping you covered. Barely. So, As you head off to your next day of medieval madness, scratching at your tunic like it's a contest, just remember, at least you've got clothes. Sort of. You've made it through another day of scratching your one tunic until your skin feels like a medieval battlefield. But before you can even think about a break, let's talk about what's probably going to kill you next, your environment. Forget dragons or roving bandits. Your biggest enemy is the everyday health hazards lurking around every corner. Welcome to the world of spoiled milk, dirty water, and open sewers. Let's start with milk. You'd think milk would be the one safe thing to drink, a nice, comforting mug of something that came from the family cow. But in the Middle Ages, milk isn't pasteurized, refrigerated, or even properly strained. It's a tepid, clumpy brew that's been sitting in the kitchen since last Tuesday. If you're lucky, it's just sour. If you're unlucky, it's home to enough bacteria to launch a plague of its own. And don't even ask about curdling. Medieval milk is basically a science experiment that nobody signed up for. So you turn to water. Surely water is safer, right? Wrong. In the Middle Ages, water is the secret killer. The village well might look inviting, but just upstream, someone's been dumping last night's chamber pot. A dead rat floats lazily in the current like it's on vacation. And even if you fetch your water from a clean source, it's teeming with invisible surprises. Parasites, bacteria, and a full cast of microbial mischief makers. Boiling water? That's a luxury. Firewood is scarce, and usually reserved for cooking whatever turnip-based disaster your mother's been brewing. So most kids just drink the water as is, and hope for the best. Sometimes they're given a bit of weak ale or cider instead. It's not that anyone wants you tipsy by breakfast, it's just that beer's safer than water, even for children. Because nothing says good parenting like starting the day with a medieval microbrew. But if the milk and the water don't get you, the open sewers will. Picture this. A shallow ditch running through the middle of town, collecting every nasty thing that people, animals, and the occasional dying chicken have to offer. That's your medieval sewer system, complete with an aroma that could knock the fleas off a rat. In some towns, they tried to be fancy and build stone gutters. But guess what? They overflow. All the time. Rainy days are like a festival of filth, with rivers of sewage rolling merrily through the streets, splashing against your bare feet and soaking into your one precious tunic. Every step is a gamble, every puddle a potential plague pit. And if you're thinking, I'll just walk on the sidewalks, think again. Sidewalks are for castles and cathedrals. You're in a village where the main road is the only road, and it's covered in mud, manure, and the occasional pile of, let's call it, mystery muck. Even if you try to jump over it, your luck usually runs out the second your foot hits a loose cobblestone, launching you face first into medieval biohazard central. Of course, you'd think your parents would be worried about all this. They are, sort of. They know bad water and spoiled milk can make you sick, but they don't exactly know why. Disease is a divine punishment or a bad wind. Take your pick. The local priest might tell you to say a prayer or wear a charm. The barber might recommend a good bloodletting. But actual prevention? That's not in the medieval medical playbook. Speaking of the barber, remember him? He's still the closest thing you have to a doctor. And when you come down with a raging fever after chugging that questionable milk, he's the one you'll call. With his rusty blade and his bag of leeches, he'll balance your humours and send you back to the fields, weaker than before. But hey, at least the ale tastes okay. Weak, but okay. And if you're desperate, you can always add a splash of vinegar to your water and pretend it's medicine. It might not cure you, but at least you'll have something else to complain about. You know what? Every time you take a sip, every time you step into the street, remember. The Middle Ages doesn't care if you're thirsty or tired. Spoiled milk, dirty water and open sewers are waiting to greet you like the worst welcoming committee in history. So, you've dodged the spoiled milk, sidestepped the sewage, and somehow survived the daily medieval game of, will I get cholera today? Congratulations. Now, let's talk about what passes for fun in the Middle Ages, because even the most overworked, underfed peasant kid needs a break from constant misery. Welcome to the thrilling world of medieval entertainment, bonfires, festivals, and executions. Let's start with the bonfires, because nothing says family fun like a massive fire in the middle of town. Whenever the villagers needed a distraction from the drudgery of daily life, and let's be honest, that was always, they'd gather around a roaring blaze. It might be for a saint's feast, a harvest festival, or just because someone decided the night needed a little extra light and a lot of noise. You'd stand there, half frozen and covered in grime, watching as the older kids threw on anything that would burn. Old straw, broken stools, suspiciously damp firewood that made the whole place smell like a goat's backside. Sparks flew like angry fireflies, and everyone would cheer as the flames reached higher than the village's tallest hut. Sometimes there'd be music, drums, pipes, and whatever passed for a lute in your corner of the world. You'd watch the grown-ups dance in that drunken shuffle style that's equal parts celebration and hazard. If you were lucky, you'd sneak a sip of weak ale while no one was looking. If you were really lucky, you'd find a scrap of roasted turnip to gnaw on. And then there were the festivals. Picture the entire village covered in makeshift banners, herbs tied to doorways, and people pretending that life wasn't a constant battle against mud and famine. Festivals were the highlight of the year, a brief chance to trade your daily suffering for communal suffering in the name of fun. Every festival had a saint to honour, Saint Michael, Saint Blaise, Saint whoever's day it is, and each one came with a parade of questionable activities, dancing, feasting, and a series of games that usually ended with someone losing a tooth. Think pig chases, wrestling matches, and that one time your cousin tried to tightrope walk across the well. Spoiler, he didn't make it. And let's not forget the market stalls, a collection of dubious goods sold by equally dubious merchants. You'd find everything from salted fish that smelled like old shoes to wooden toys that gave you splinters in places you didn't know you could get splinters. You might beg your parents for a treat, but good luck. Most kids ended up chewing on last year's leftover bread while staring wistfully at the honeycakes they couldn't afford. But if bonfires and festivals didn't scratch your itch for excitement, don't worry, executions had you covered. That's right, nothing says medieval family outing like watching some poor soul meet their maker in the town square. Executions were the medieval version of Netflix, a crowd-pleasing spectacle guaranteed to draw an audience. Everyone turned up, peasants, merchants, even the local priest, who'd bless the condemned, or at least give him a stern look. If you were a kid, you'd squeeze through the crowd to get a good view. Morbid curiosity beats the plague-riddled tedium of everyday life every time. Sometimes it was a hanging, sometimes a beheading, and if the authorities really wanted to make a statement, they'd go all out with a good old-fashioned burning. Parents would hoist you on their shoulders so you wouldn't miss the action. They'd tell you it was a lesson in morality. But let's be honest, it was the best show in town. Afterward, you'd run off to play at the edge of the square, reenacting the scene with sticks and enthusiastic shouts. Medieval kids had a talent for turning trauma into play. Meanwhile, the grown-ups would gossip about how the condemned probably deserved it. He stole a pig, or insulted the wrong noble, or forgot to pay his tithes. Justice, medieval style. Sure, it's grim. But in a world where every day feels like a survival challenge, these moments of communal entertainment are the glue that holds the village together. Bonfires remind you that there's warmth and laughter. Festivals prove that even the poorest peasant can dance like an idiot. And executions, well, they're a reminder that no matter how bad your day's been, at least you're not the one with your head on the chopping block. So when you crawl into your scratchy straw bed at night, still scratching your tunic, and close your eyes, you dream of bonfires, laughter, and the occasional flaming pitchfork. Because in the Middle Ages, entertainment wasn't just about fun. It was a brief, glorious escape from the daily grind of filth, hunger, and the priest's lectures. So, you've danced around bonfires, watched your neighbour's cousin get executed, and maybe even snagged a burnt crust of bread at the festival. Now it's time to grow up, because in the Middle Ages, that happens fast. Welcome to the thrilling world of your first job, where the workforce starts at 5 years old and no one's asking if you're ready. Your first promotion from aimless mud stomping to productive labour usually comes around the time you're strong enough to lift a bucket or chase a chicken. Medieval parents see you less as a child and more as a half-sized farmhand with slightly more enthusiasm than sense. Congratulations, your training starts now. The term job is generous because it's less about wages and more about survival. Money? Forget it. Payment is in the form of not being yelled at, and maybe a pat on the head if you're lucky. Your schedule? Sun up to sundown, with occasional breaks to gulp down watery pottage or chase the rats away from the grain sack. Let's start with the basics. Fetching water. It's the classic starter task in the medieval job market. The village well might be half a mile away, and the bucket might weigh more than you do. But guess what? You're the designated hauler. You trudge back and forth, arms trembling, trying not to spill half of it before you get home, because that's a sin punishable by Dad's belt. Next comes animal duty. Chickens, pigs, goats, anything with a pulse that your family counts as livestock. You feed them, clean up after them, and try to keep them from escaping. Chickens are basically feathered anarchists. Pigs? They're smarter than you and twice as mean. Goats? They think headbutting you is a sport. Congratulations, you're now the official zookeeper. Fieldwork is next. If your family farms, and most do, you'll be planting, weeding, harvesting, and breaking your back with a hoe that's been in the family longer than the hut you live in. You learn fast that rocks are the enemy, weeds multiply like fleas, and rain never comes when you need it. Every time you bend over, your back reminds you that childhood is a fleeting concept in the Middle Ages. If your dad's got a trade, blacksmith, tanner, cooper, or any other medieval profession that smells worse than a 3-day-old fish, you're expected to pitch in. That means stoking fires, fetching tools, or carrying heavy things you can barely lift. Apprenticeship sounds fancy, but it's medieval for free labour. You'll get your share of singed eyebrows, splinters, and blisters to show for it. Meanwhile, your mother's got plans for you too. Inside the hut, there's enough to do to keep you busy until you're 40. Grinding grain? That's your new after-dinner activity, along with spinning wool, patching holes in the family tunic, and stirring the pottage so it doesn't congeal into a medieval meatloaf. And let's not forget the toddlers, your siblings who scream at everything. Babysitting isn't a paying gig, but it's still expected. But hey, at least you're building character, right? You're learning that life is a series of repetitive, back-breaking tasks designed to keep the family fed and the priest off your back. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get to skip the worst chores if the neighbour's barn is on fire and they need every able body to form a bucket brigade. Of course, accidents happen. The field's full of hidden dangers, holes that swallow small children, rusty plough blades, suspicious puddles, and the occasional vengeful rooster. If you break a bone or slice your finger, the local barber will fix you up, probably with a rusty knife and a prayer. Then it's back to work, because no one's got time for convalescence. If you're lucky, you'll find a small moment of joy in the work, maybe a frog in the well, a funny-shaped potato, or the satisfaction of not spilling the milk. But don't get too cozy. Tomorrow, the same chores will be waiting, plus whatever new misery the medieval world's cooked up overnight. And don't think that by the time you're 12 you'll have some cushy promotion to manager of the farm. Nope. You'll just get more work, bigger tools, heavier buckets, more responsibility. The cycle continues until you're old enough to have your own kids and start the whole process all over again, like a generational chain letter of exhaustion and dirt. You've got to grab that bucket, chase that chicken, and try not to trip over your own bare feet. Because in the Middle Ages, childhood ends the moment you can carry a tool, and the only break you get is when you're asleep in a straw bed that probably smells like a goat. But do you know that this isn't even the worst? Oh yes, Something more sinister is on its way. You've survived your first job at the ripe old age of 5, fetching water, feeding goats, and weeding fields like a pint-sized peasant on a mission. Congratulations, you've officially earned your stripes as a productive member of medieval society. But don't get too comfortable with your newfound status as family farmhand, because the next milestone on your medieval bingo card is marriage. And guess what? It's coming for you before you even figure out how to spell your own name. In the Middle Ages, marriage isn't about romance or candlelit dinners by the pigsty. It's a transaction, a business deal, and a way to keep the family from losing that one valuable cow to the neighbour's dowry demands. You, my friend, are a bargaining chip, small, scrawny, and probably still scratching at that tunic you inherited from your older brother. For boys, your betrothal might start around the time you can lift a sack of grain without toppling over, somewhere around 7 or 8. For girls, it's even earlier. The second you can carry a wooden bucket without falling into the well, your parents are eyeing potential matches like they're shopping for a second-hand goat. Picture this. You're still playing with sticks and rocks when your parents pull you aside to discuss your future. See that family over by the well? Their daughter's got good hips and a dowry that includes half a pig. You're going to marry her. You nod. Because what else are you going to do? Say no? Not unless you fancy sleeping with the pigs tonight. And let's talk about the dowry. A delightful tradition where the bride's family hands over goods, animals or land to the groom's family to seal the deal. It's like a reverse ransom. The richer the dowry, the more appealing the match. Got a cow? Jackpot. A few chickens? That'll do. A rusty pot? Well, beggars can't be choosers. Once the deal's made, you're betrothed, which is medieval speak for no backsies. You're too young to understand what that means, but the adults start treating you like you're halfway to the grave. Forget running around with your friends or playing in the mud. You've got responsibilities now, like not embarrassing your parents and staying alive long enough to reach the wedding. If you're a girl, things get even more interesting. Everyone suddenly cares a lot about your virtue, which is medieval code for keep your legs crossed. The local priest, the village gossips, your mother, and that one suspicious neighbour all keep a watchful eye on you like you're a prize pumpkin at the harvest fair. Because if there's even a hint of scandal, the dowry might vanish faster than your dad's last pair of shoes. Meanwhile, the boys are expected to prove they can handle a plough, a hoe, and a bar fight before they're old enough to grow a proper beard. Impress the elders by not falling asleep in the field, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be seen as a worthy groom. And the wedding itself, forget the white dress and violins. Think more along the lines of a simple ceremony in the local church, followed by a party in the dirt courtyard. There's ale, maybe some stale bread, and the neighbours arguing over who drank too much. Your parents hover nearby, counting chickens and making sure no one tries to renegotiate the dowry. If you're lucky, the priest shows up sober enough to pronounce you man and wife before stumbling back to the tavern. And just like that, you're officially hitched, probably before your voice has even cracked. No honeymoon, no heart-shaped beds, just straight to work on the family farm. And in case you're wondering, yes, you're still expected to keep up with your chores. Marriage doesn't mean a break from medieval life. It just means more work and a brand new partner who's just as clueless as you are. Maybe one day you'll both get matching tunics. Maybe. There you have it. Marriage in the Middle Ages. Less about love and more about livestock. Less about choice and more about survival. You're betrothed before you hit puberty. Your life plans are mapped out before you learn to read, and your romantic future depends on a goat and a rusty pot. So you've survived your first job by age 5 and gotten betrothed before you even grew a proper patch of armpit hair. Congratulations. But hold on to your lice, because the real test of your medieval mettle is just beginning. Welcome to the triple threat that keeps every peasant family awake at night. Famine, fire, and feudal lords. Let's start with famine, the ever-present shadow over medieval life. Crops fail more often than Dad's attempts at singing. A few weeks of too much rain, or not enough, and suddenly your grain is a soggy mess. Your turnips look like shriveled toes, and the village pigs have mysteriously vanished. The whole family gathers around the pot of pottage, peering in like it's a magic trick. Spoiler, it's still just water and a suspicious chunk of last week's cabbage. When famine hits, your parents get that tight-lipped look. Meals shrink to a crust of bread and a handful of questionable weeds. Kids like you learn the difference between hungry and starving, and discover that starving means chewing on a shoe if it looks tender enough. You'd trade your one tunic for a loaf of bread in a heartbeat. But who's going to want a lice-riddled rag when they're already half-starved themselves? And don't think you can pop by the neighbour's house for a snack. Their kids are just as hungry, and they've probably already eaten their cat. Charity is a rare commodity in a place where everyone's scraping by on prayers and boiled water. Just when you think your stomach can't get any emptier, here comes the second joy of medieval life: fire. That's right. If famine doesn't get you, there's always the chance that your entire village will turn into a torchlight procession at the worst possible moment. Your house is made of wood, straw, and hope. One stray ember from the hearth, one unlucky lightning strike, and suddenly the whole place is glowing like Dad's bald spot in the noonday sun. No fire department here, just frantic bucket lines and desperate prayers to whichever saint handles fire emergencies. Your job? Run around screaming, haul water from the well, and maybe rescue the family goat if you're feeling heroic. Spoiler alert, that goat doesn't appreciate being saved. Once the fire's out, if it's out, you're left with a smoking pile of regrets and the charred remains of your one good spoon. But hey, at least you've still got the feudal lord to cheer you up. The third pillar of your medieval nightmare. You'd think that after all the farm work, the hunger, and the occasional village bonfire, you'd get a break. But no, there's always the local lord swooping in to remind you who's in charge. He's the one who owns the land you live on, and probably the air you breathe. Everything you grow, he gets a piece. Every animal you raise, he gets a cut. Every time you manage to scrape together enough pennies to buy a second-hand belt. He's already figured out how to tax it. Your lord might show up once a month to collect his due, riding in on his horse like he's some kind of heroic knight. But let's be real. He's here for your grain and your respect. If you're lucky, he'll leave with only half your harvest and a few of your chickens. If you're unlucky, he'll bring his soldiers, and you'll be paying double. Once in taxes, and again in whatever else they decide to help themselves to. And heaven help you if the neighbouring lord decides he's got a score to settle with yours. Then it's time to grab a pointy stick, stand behind the village's one shield, and pray the arrows miss. If your lord wins, you get to keep working. If he loses, well, guess whose village gets pillaged next? Still, you keep going, because what choice do you have? Every day is a balancing act of survival, keeping enough grain hidden from the tax collector, enough water stored for the dry season, and enough energy left after chores to not drop dead by sundown. But if you make it through famine, fire, and feudal lords, you've officially earned your stripes as a medieval survivor. You might be skinny, dirty, and covered in lice, but you're still standing. And tomorrow? Well, there's always the plague to look forward to. Come to think of it, you've survived famine, fire, and feudal lords, like a medieval action hero with fleas. But just when you think you've got this whole not dying thing figured out, the Middle Ages decides to roll out its favourite attraction: death, and lots of it. Welcome to the Grim Reaper's favourite playground, where kids like you are a prime target for every plague, pox, and pestilence that medieval Europe can cook up. First on the hit list, the plague. The Black Death isn't just some ominous name from your history books. It's the A-list celebrity of medieval disease. Picture a horror show of boils, fevers, and a smell so bad even the pigs can't stand it. When it comes to wiping out half the village in a few weeks, The plague is the undefeated champion. The best part? It's not picky. Young, old, rich, poor, everyone's fair game. If your neighbour starts coughing, you're already halfway to a shallow grave. People might try to ward it off with charms, prayers, or suspicious herbal brews, but spoiler alert, none of it works. Once it's in the village, it's a race to see who can die fastest. If the plague's not enough, don't worry. The Middle Ages has a whole menu of deadly delights. Smallpox, measles, and dysentery are lining up for their turn. Each one comes with its own brand of agony, oozing sores, unstoppable diarrhea, and enough fevers to cook your last turnip dinner right on your forehead. And let's not forget tuberculosis, known as consumption, because it slowly consumes your strength and dignity. This disease is like the slow burn horror movie of the medieval health department. It can last months or years, and you'll cough up enough blood to make the local barber think you're auditioning for Hamlet. If you manage to dodge the big-name diseases, there's always the everyday hazards. Step on a rusty nail, infection. Cut your finger on a scythe, infection. Breathe too close to the neighbour who's been sneezing into the communal water bucket. You guessed it, infection. Medieval life is a game of bacterial roulette. But hey, at least you've got the local barber to help you out. Remember him from your last visit? He's back with his rusty blade and his bag of leeches, ready to balance your humours with a little bloodletting. It's like a medieval spa day, except instead of cucumber water, you get to watch your own lifeblood trickle into a bowl. And if the Reaper's favourite diseases don't get you, accidents just might. Falling off a thatched roof, getting trampled by a runaway ox, or stepping on a suspiciously angry snake. These are all valid ways to meet your end. Life insurance? Ha! The best you can hope for is a halfway decent burial, and a priest who doesn't mumble too much. Speaking of burial, let's talk about that charming medieval tradition. When you die, because let's face it, odds are pretty good, you'll probably end up in a shallow grave with a few rocks on top. No fancy headstone, no funeral parlour, just a quick prayer and back to the fields for everyone else. Because the Grim Reaper's always got another customer waiting. The worst part, death is always just around the corner, lurking in the alleys, the water bucket, the neighbour's hacking cough. Kids like you see it every day. The neighbour's son who was playing tag last week is suddenly gone. Your baby sister never wakes up from her fever nap. Even Dad, big, strong, unstoppable, can vanish overnight, leaving Mom to pick up the pieces with nothing but tears and stale bread. But you keep going. Because in the Middle Ages, life is a fragile thread woven through dirt, sweat, and prayer. You play in the dirt. You work until your bones ache. You dodge the Reaper's scythe as long as you can. And when the time comes, you hope there's at least a candle lit in the village church, and that someone remembers your name. So, while the Grim Reaper might call the shots in the Middle Ages, he doesn't get the last laugh every time. Because even in the face of plague, famine, and feudal lords, people find a way to keep living. They sing at the bonfire, they dance at the festival, they carve jokes into wooden spoons just to feel human. So go ahead, scratch your lice, hug your filthy tunic, and tip your hat to death. He's earned his spot as the star of the medieval show. But remember, you're still here, still breathing, and that's something to celebrate in the middle of the Reaper's playground. And there it is, the final chapter of your crash course in surviving the Middle Ages. Now, go enjoy your next bowl of questionable pottage, and maybe say a little prayer you make it to tomorrow. So, you've survived the Grim Reaper's playground, dodged the plague, skipped over smallpox, and miraculously avoided that suspiciously angry snake lurking near the pig pen. Congratulations, you've officially leveled up in the ultimate medieval survival game. But before you start planning your big promotion to adult, let's talk about what growing up medieval actually looks like, assuming you've made it this far. First things first, you're not out of the woods yet. Growing up in the Middle Ages is like winning the lottery, except the jackpot is a slightly larger pile of chores and the privilege of not dying of dysentery before puberty. If you've reached the ripe old age of 12, the local priest probably considers you a miracle. Your parents might even brag about you in the market square, right after complaining that you eat too much and smell like a stable. By now, you've had your fair share of jobs, diseases, and near-death experiences. You've hauled water until your arms felt like overcooked eels, chased goats that definitely knew how to mock you, and eaten so many suspicious root vegetables that your stomach's developed a suspicious twitch. Congratulations, you've earned the medieval equivalent of a high school diploma. Can survive dirt, work, and lice. Of course, with growing up comes growing responsibilities. Remember the sweet days when your biggest worry was a leaky roof or the neighbour's rooster attacking you on the way to the well? Those are gone. Now you're expected to pull your weight like a full-grown peasant. More fieldwork, heavier buckets, sharper tools, and yes, still no proper shoes. If you're a boy, welcome to the wonderful world of manhood, which means endless hours in the fields, learning how to swing a scythe without chopping off your own toes, and maybe even training with a spear in case the local lord decides it's time for another skirmish with the neighbour. Because nothing says adulthood like fighting over a patch of turnips with the next village over. If you're a girl, your life doesn't get any easier. You've been betrothed since before you learned to braid your own hair, and now everyone's watching to see if you're ready to become a wife and, brace yourself, a mother. Your education shifts from try not to die to try not to embarrass the family. You learn to cook with one pot and a prayer, manage a household that's one step from falling apart, and juggle the endless parade of screaming babies and goats that wander inside uninvited. And let's not forget about puberty, everyone's favourite phase. Nothing quite like your first medieval pimple to remind you that even in the 14th century, adolescence is a hot mess. You're growing taller, but your tunic definitely isn't. Your voice might crack if you're a boy, but that won't stop the local priest from expecting you to sing hymns at Sunday Mass like your soul depends on it. But here's the kicker. In the Middle Ages, growing up isn't a drawn-out process. You don't get years to find yourself, paint your hair purple, or travel around Europe on a gap year. By the time you hit 14 or 15, you're expected to be a fully functioning adult, working, married, and possibly raising kids of your own. That's right. One day you're playing in the dirt, the next, you're negotiating with a neighbour over a cow for your dowry. And let's be honest, no one's really asking if you're ready. You just do it because that's how survival works. Childhood, that sweet, fleeting time of stick swords and half-frozen toes, is officially over. Now it's all about keeping the family alive, keeping the Lord happy, and maybe, just maybe, keeping a few teeth in your head until you're 30. If you're lucky enough to live in a village that hasn't burned down in the last month, you might even get a chance to join in the festivities now and then. A feast day, a midsummer bonfire, or maybe a wedding where you get to dance awkwardly in a circle while the local minstrel screeches something vaguely tuneful. These are the highlights of your new adult life, fleeting moments of fun in a world that rarely offers second chances. So, if you've made it this far, through the dirt, disease, hunger, and heartbreak, congratulations. You're officially grown up. You've survived more in 15 years than most people today can imagine surviving in a lifetime. And while the Reaper might still be lurking in the shadows, you've got your one tunic, your rusty tools, and your family, plus a stubborn streak that's carried you this far. So, there you have it, a guided tour through the messy, muddy, flea-infested world of growing up medieval. From your first straw-stuffed cradle to your first near-death experience, and every questionable pottage in between, life in the Middle Ages was a daily test of survival, resilience, and a willingness to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Forget everything you learned from fairy tales. There were no sparkly castles, no happily ever afters, no Instagram-worthy breakfasts. Instead, there was one tunic, endless chores, and the Grim Reaper making regular house calls. Every day was a balancing act between hunger and humour, toil and terror, lice and laughter. But through all the filth and fever, one thing was undeniable. Medieval kids were tough. They worked from the moment they could walk, carried buckets bigger than their heads, and faced challenges that would make a modern-day adult cry into their oat milk latte. Their lives were short, but every sunrise was a small victory, proof that even in the harshest times, people found ways to survive, to celebrate, and to keep going. So the next time you complain about a slow Wi-Fi connection or lukewarm coffee, just remember, in the Middle Ages, your biggest concern wasn't your Starbucks order. It was whether the water you drank would kill you, whether your dinner was moving on its own, or whether your neighbour's goats would eat your last pair of shoes. Life was short, brutal, and often absurd, but they lived it anyway, with laughter and grit. And that, dear reader, is the ultimate medieval survival skill. The art of finding light in the darkness, even when the darkness smelled like last month's pottage. So, take a deep breath of your modern, mostly parasite-free air. Give thanks for your clean water and your bug-free bed. And maybe, just maybe, say a quiet thank you to the kids who came before you, those tough-as-nails medieval survivors, who paved the way by simply refusing to give up. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where survival wasn't a given, but a daily act of defiance. And guess what? You made it through the tour. Long live your imaginary lice-free tunic, and may your next meal not involve weevils.